everybody. Come on, I know there's a few of you, but we can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. Hell yeah, there we go. As introduced, my name is James Haken, run a company called Think Hospitality, talking a little bit about some of the trends that are happening and how that's impacting the hotel space particularly. Ultimately, we are strategic hospitality consultants and venture partners. We do asset management, deal making, and work into strategy and within mostly food and beverage, but increasingly into other subsectors that sit alongside. Everything but rooms we talk about. We are based in London, Dubai, Copenhagen, Tallinn, Estonia, and San Francisco, USA. We're a partnership-based business. We've been operating for about 8 years now, and we've worked in 22 countries with some incredible brands all over the world, a lot in this region. Our partnership base, you can also see, are based quite globally. Jen, who many of you will know, who was one of the involved in this organization bench before joining us last year. He leads this part of the world, and I've been working here for about 15 years, always based remotely, but working in and out, and Jen's really been driving the agenda here. It's really interesting in terms of how we've seen the evolution in terms of the place the Middle East plays, particularly within the global scene and from a food and beverage and restaurant standpoint. I remember coming here originally, and I would say really probably until 5 or 6 years ago, there was always this premise that trends move east around the world in terms of food and beverage. And there's a very strong view that actually, for a long time, you could even track the kind of evolution eastwards around the world. And it was said that if you want something from Asia to work really well in Europe and to the Middle East, it would actually often go via the US first. So there was this constant easterly movement. I think what's really interesting as we see this kind of continual coming of age of food and beverage here, particularly in Dubai. I mean, it is the heart of restaurant innovation and evolution here in the Middle East, but increasing that's obviously in other regions of the Middle East too. We're seeing this much more dynamic space. And many of you will have seen that we're very much seeing concepts from here being exported, both east to India, particularly, and then west into Europe and right out into the US. And I think this has been really fascinating. It's really interesting to me that we recently did a piece of work for one of the big Saudi government organizations where we monitored and looked at 5 cities around the world around profitability, ease of access to open restaurant concepts and so on. We then laid on top of that Dubai. It wasn't, from a Saudi perspective, that wasn't one of the 5 that they were obviously looking at, but it was an interesting exercise. And you can very clearly see that on almost all metrics, it just makes a lot of sense to be driving in this region. What's really interesting, though, is when you start to work, and we've worked with localization from brands coming out of this region, particularly into Europe and North America, where it's a real shock when they see the metrics, particularly at the bottom line, around the realities of how that plays out. I'm going to look at 5 key trends here today around the kind of top line trends. And when we look at trends, we're not looking at is what I would call the cyclical trends that will change every year or 18 months and are very orientated around immediate buzz. So, for instance, this year you might have cocktails that are blue that are very interesting, and next year it might be red or it might be smoke-based, and we're not looking at that level. What we're looking at is secular trends and the things that we see as having long-term, impactful, meaningful impact on the sector at a structural level. And I think that the first 3 that we'll pick up within this intentional living space is this idea of back to basics. So the luxury of simplicity and how that's often winning out against what I guess more traditionally may have been perceived as the bling luxury. And I think this balance through. Clearly, I'm also in a part of the world where both can win. And I'm not saying that there isn't room for both, but we are increasingly seeing what you would really define as being more simplistic luxury. I think the second one is this idea of connection and community. And I think what we see is, particularly in this part of the world, often there was a view that you had very different cultures, obviously living side by side, and it was very difficult necessarily to always be able to deliver for multiple different cultural groups or tribes, as we like to call them, within one space or within one development. I think what we're really seeing is through maturity of population and how that actually plays through, that this sense of connection community becomes more important than ever, and that's really something that we're seeing increasingly on the when it comes to asset managers, particularly and asset owners looking at how they're going to move forward. It's really about how you get this connection between locals or a local community much more engaged within your property, but rather than just it being within a restaurant sphere, it's how you create more integrated spaces. I think that you only need to look at 25 Hour here to look at a property that's done remarkably well at creating this all-rounded space that really feels connected and created a community in its own right. Then the third one here is this kind of physical and mental well-being. So, and with that, it's really interesting that whilst you have I guess you can reference it as health as a trend, it's much more than that. Clearly, again, there's micro trends and there's cyclical trends in this space, but what we are seeing more is people living more intentionally and considered and being much more considered about physical and mental well-being. That comes through in low and no, beyond religious reasons. That comes through in the respect of how people consume, and we'll come on in a moment to how that's impacted by the whole change of weight loss and this whole space too. These are the kind of base level trends that we'd recognize, and then along the bottom are the reasons that are driving this. So conscious consumption, so guests are prioritizing fewer, better experiences that reflect ethics and sustainability over status necessarily. And again, this isn't ubiquitous with anything. It's not that this is the whole world, but this is certainly growing. The desire for meaningful connection, this shift from material to emotional value, which I think that we've really seen over the last decade coming to fruition more and more, is this idea of materialism declining, particularly off the rise of the Gen Z audience. And actually what we're seeing with Gen Z and with Gen Y and with Gen Z and Generation Alpha, we're actually seeing that come through even more prolifically, because you have to think about societally what people have seen within their generation that impacts the decision they make, because ultimately this is all a behavioral psychology play. And if you think about the major impacts of the world over the last 20 years and the impacts that we've seen, which have meant that people have gone from having wealth to having little and back and forth through financial crisis, and more recently through the impact of COVID, and of course the long-term impact of that will very strongly look at how people and how particularly Generation Alpha see and view the world. And then this idea that sustainability is becoming a standard, which we'll come on to shortly as well. I wanted to we've just picked up one short case study on each. I think that, of course, there's lots going on always in this part of the world particularly, but to try and look externally. This is Fura, which is the new One Hotel in Copenhagen. It's recently launched. Chantal Nicholson, that's Green Michelin-star chef out of London, launched there, originally a Kiwi, is a Kiwi, I guess, and an interesting one to look at in terms of how that's flowing through. Next up, intergenerational escapes. I think that we have been through a generation where, as an 80s child, we were given ultra-processed food, given very, very wrongly coloured mocktails and all kinds of E numbers in the drinks that we had, and meal times would have been a complete shit show for our parents, whether it be at home or in a external environment like a restaurant. You fast forward through the process of course, pad dominance. I have a 4 and 5-year-old. The constant argument and decision around when or not they can have their iPads or Amazon Fire tablets is obviously a constant challenge. But it's interesting that when you analyze consumer sentiment around this, what's very strong is that people want meaningful, real connection with their children in environments like restaurants. They don't want an environment. I'm not saying all the time, of course, there are clearly times where that's fine, but there is this increasing piece which is about almost generational guilt about spending more meaningful time with your children. As a father, I certainly feel it for sure. But these multi-generational moments come through, and competitive socializing is obviously working into this. I mean, it's obviously the next movement up in terms of how you take leisure and move it into something that has an opportunity to do more. And I think it's beyond just burgers and so on and how that plays through. This is quite interesting in this part of the world, that I think because the experience factor and the entertainment sector is so strong anyway, often what we're seeing, particularly in the UAE, is that these what we're seeing in other parts of the world, the US and Europe particularly, the competitive socializing concepts that are coming here aren't necessarily landing quite as they are elsewhere, because there's already a lot going on in other places. And I think that that's one of the interesting and the questions that we'll see is how that comes to be in environments that actually still have a heavily touristic element to the way that their business is coming through. And the other one here is about educating and nudging through food. We've not seen it as much in this part of the world, but we are seeing it increasingly in Europe, North America, and also, very surprisingly, some of the work that we've done in South America recently around this idea that how do we use the educational opportunity and the opportunity of someone's children engaging in a hotel or restaurant experience to be able to nudge their belief and understanding around what good food looks like, and how do we bring them on a journey of understanding nutrition, and also more generally an environment which is I guess more a travel-based, experiential, explorative mindset within children. Of course, that's got to be about light well-being, and the edutainment is what they're calling it, is how you do this in a way that's soft nudging. It's interesting that when you look at the Gen Z, the view is that Gen Z is going to be influencing 80% of family travel decisions within the next decade. And then this idea of quality time consolidation, which I was referencing before, around the kind of guilt factor and how, as more and more pressure happens within the family unit, and particularly in environments where you've got a lot of third-party childcare, it means more meaningful time needs to be spent, and then it's how you make that time more meaningful. I think it's very easy within these presentations to be showing stuff that's brand new all the time, but I think that it would be remiss not to reference Wave House here at Atlantis as a good example of an outlet that does this very well in terms of blending dining with that entertainment element, creating a space that really delivers on those points. Next up, we've got this elevating the experience. I really don't need to be able to reference. This is if anything, Dubai leads the world in terms of elevating experience when it comes to food and beverage. All eyes are on this part of the world. What's really interesting here is this moment's worth sharing is increasingly becoming less about getting a phone out, and we're seeing this trend towards actually a lot of higher end restaurants are starting to ask for phones to be put away at certain times of the experience. We're seeing a flip from, I remember sitting in design meetings 5-10 years ago where everyone was talking about Instagrammability and creating lighting that works really well for Instagram. We're increasingly getting, particularly chef-led restaurants, being clear that actually they're trying to create lighting that means that people aren't encouraged to be using phones in the restaurant, which is an interesting piece. And the last point I wanted to make here is around this intuitive tech. We have a very strong view, which is that we're seeing this continued divergence from food for fuel on one side, so convenience-based dining, And of course, the reality of the last, particularly the last decade, is that we've moved to a position where you can get food from anywhere. So everyone has tried to eat into the value chain of food, whether it be fuel stations or gas stations, whether it be full-scale supermarkets and those types of environments, playing into much better quality, almost restaurant quality meals. Everyone's trying to get a slice of that action. On that convenience-focused occasion, we see that technology is obviously becoming more and more vital, but very dominant technology in terms of consumer-facing tech. What we see as being the big opportunity, and we're already watching this happen. We were recently in Vegas looking at the next generation of what they call the control rooms in some of the Vegas casinos around changing environment, adapting environment based on sensor-based technology. And this is really where the future of technology within the experiential is going. I'm on a board out of Seattle from one of the biggest tech players in the world, and it's a really interesting space in terms of how they're now looking at investing in digital-first brands, but not front of house, back of house, so full robotic solutions, back of house, with the view that actually front of house will remain almost analog. I see that one of those images hasn't changed, but a great example of this, they've just announced that they're coming back for, I think it was their 9th season at Address Beach Resort, is Dream in terms of the experiential element. The immersive and experiential, social dining and culinary community, this is really a huge area of growth. I think that we've currently got around between 10 to 15 projects where people are looking at creating social dining. So this is environments where people come at a fixed time, and it is a entirely fixed menu. This isn't a tasting menu. This is a casual type environment, but it's like going to someone's house for a dinner party. I will deliver what I'm delivering. Everybody gets the same thing, and it's all served on large communal tables, and this is becoming very popular through Europe, North America. One of the challenges that you have here is the hugely cultural diversity, which means that we see a couple of people are looking and trialing at this, but there's a lot of reluctance and concern around how that's going to work. And then this theatrical simplicity for me is really, really quite interesting. Of course, we've seen the move. You only need to look at the Guild as an example of people doing really interesting stuff around bringing cooking front of house. But the move away from overly processing the food and being able to have a much stronger visibility. Anyone that's been, we went a couple of weeks ago to Woohoo. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out as a concept. I think that it's very ambitious. It may feel a little faddy, but let's see how it lands in the market here. In terms of moving forward, we see 5 key areas that are going to be quite defining over the next 20 years. So we're already seeing, in the US particularly, and I think the stat that I saw last week was that between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 consumers in the US has already trialed a weight loss drug in the US. So it's huge. And that's already reducing sales. And you can see that on the trackers in the US. And obviously this is coming thick and fast. The second one is how mushrooms and mycelium is playing through. So looking at retail, obviously we've seen plant-based decline quite significantly, but the mushroom piece is coming up, and we think is clearly a long-term opportunity from a sustainability standpoint. In terms of carbon pressure, with the way that Trump is, and the US is quite anti-guiding the world in some respects, and almost creating a hiccup, I think that we need to look beyond that. The EU have already created, and it's coming into force next year, very strict rules around plastic and carbon pressures, and I think that we will see more legislation coming from this way. AI is increasingly moving from pilots within restaurant and restaurant technology to actually being plumbing. You look at these brands, Starbucks, Domino's, Uber Eats, Wendy's, McDonald's, Applebee's, they're all using AI proactively in their operations daily. And then the last one is that robotics are here to stay, and and we're seeing this particularly within the QSR space. But the project that I'm involved in, that I've been out to Seattle with recently, we were shown humanoid robots that are all but ready, and within that space, that will unlock the opportunity for fine dining and casual dining. Of course, not with the very technical element, but in terms of being able to release pressure on labour in high margin, in high labour areas. The 4 ways that that's coming through in terms of evolving owner expectation is that increasingly this part of the world, of course, we're seeing the 50 best, Michelin, so on, being used as conversion tools, and that's increasingly in conversations around particularly very big incentives when it comes to deal making here in this region, and patently it's massively helped in terms of securing the place of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, obviously Saudi are coming thick and fast with some of this stuff in terms of their global place within the world order of food. Sustainability has moved to the deal table. We really don't see real estate deals happening anymore where this isn't a consideration, at least, if not a requirement. We're really seeing this question mark around programming, not just menus. I think in the past it was all focused a lot around proposition, and I think that people are looking at programming alongside proposition. And then also this shift away, and I thought it worked very well into our next session, which is about not just creating standalone hotels, but people looking at lifestyle districts. This is a one-pager that we often share at the moment. We update it regularly around some of where we see the kind of more cyclical trends happening in the immediate space, but worthwhile a click of that. And it's at that point I'm happy to hand over to what looks like, and it's going to be a fantastic panel on 25 Jump, which is a wonderful destination that we were at a couple of weeks ago. So thank you for listening to me today.